I think beekeeping is one of those things that there's so many things that are going on and so many ways of achieving the same thing that you can challenge, but don't do it openly. Just think to yourself, will that work or won't it? Why is that? Well, there's a lot of new discoveries, and of course a lot of the old information's in the books, and of course it's being superseded. There are quite a lot of fallacies, some people may call them myths, a lot of it misinformation, and I'm afraid the further you get into beekeeping you realise that there's quite a lot of poor and perhaps inappropriate advice as well. There's also quite a bit of false logic, which I think is largely brought about by people tending to humanise bees. Rather than understanding what the bees require, they seem to do it from a human perspective, which may not be what the bees want. There are quite a lot of inexperienced beekeepers now, and no disrespect to them, but there's also going on from that, you get experienced teachers and also writers as well. There are reasons for it, which I won't discuss today, I've no need to, but what it results in very often is a lot of copying and pasting, and perhaps even rearranging words, to try and cover it up, and perhaps you might get a different meaning from it. Of course, there's a lot of information now on the internet, various forums, websites, videos, and those sort of things, and they may be inappropriate for your particular situation. We all know the two well-worn sayings, don't we? And you probably know them before I put them up on the screen, but I'll put them up anyway. Bees don't read the books. Why is that? It's because they don't write them. It's humans that write them, and they don't write them necessarily from the bee's point of view. And the other one, of course, is ask X number of beekeepers a question, the same question, and you get a Y number of answers. Well, there are, of course, reasons for that. But I ask the question, well, why ask that number of beekeepers in the first place? Don't you trust the first one? If you don't trust them, why ask them? You may not give them all the information, and I get asked a lot of questions, as I suspect many of you do, and you very often need to ask more questions to find out what actually the real problem is, and it may well not be what the original question was. So that's another good reason. It may be that the person asking the question is asking different people who've got different systems, and of course they're going to give the answer based on what they do in their apiary. And there's a whole load of other reasons like that. So ask the question, is what you're told correct? Now correct, it may well be correct in one place, but perhaps, or in 1 year, but perhaps not in another. So perhaps we'll get rid of that word and replace it with reliable, because I think that's probably better. But also we could add appropriate too, because somebody may well do something that's not appropriate to the way you do it. It could simply be that you seek information from a different part of the country or even a different part of the world. And some of you keep bees in California or Florida aren't going to be keeping them the same way as if they're in Weston-super-Mare or Newcastle-under-Lyme. Is what you're told reliable then? Well, it depends on loads of things. Could be the location, where you are, the climate. Could be the time of year, because it could well be that if you've got an issue with a colony, you may well treat it differently at the end of April than you would the end of August. Could be the type of bee. And I know there's a great view that all bees act the same. Well, they don't. For the simple reason that perhaps some queens may well be much more prolific than others, and of course the bees will respond differently to perhaps the same treatment. If the question gives all the information, which I've already touched on, could be the experience and knowledge of the people who are answering the question, because some people may well be much more experienced than others. Quite a bit of prejudice in beekeeping, and we won't dwell on that. Misinterpretation of what's being said, which could be for a variety of reasons, including the changes in terminology which have happened over the years. a couple of things which I will touch on a little bit later. And there's a whole load of reasons why the information that you've been given or that you've gleaned or whatever may not perhaps be reliable. Not to worry, help is here, promise you. The book recently been published, and there it is, but I'm not here to sell books. I'm just to tell you that it's available and you can buy them on at least 3 stands downstairs. They do cover many of the points that beekeepers come across, and what was intended to be literally a small booklet increased, and it's now, it finished up at over 100,000 words, so it's sort of a major volume. Now, don't worry, I don't know 100,000 different words, so I've had to use some of them several times. What I haven't done is rubbish anything, because I don't think that does any good in beekeeping at all. And we do hear it anywhere, local association or anything like, oh, don't talk to so-and-so, they talk rubbish. You may think they talk rubbish, but they might not. What I've done is I've taken some common sort of sayings and advice and that sort of thing, and all I've done is questioned it. I've done it with a bit of discussion as well, in places of photographic evidence, and some of which I'll show on the screen, and I've given possible alternatives with perhaps justification. It's not saying that's wrong, I'm right. All I'm saying is that there may well be an alternative, and having kept bees just short of 60 years, I've come across many other alternatives. All I want to do is try to get beekeepers and the craft of beekeeping away from teaching by what I call beekeeping by numbers. Bees do this, or bees do that, or bees do something else. They do occasionally, but very often they do a bit of that and a bit of that and a bit of something else. So what I want to try and get all beekeepers to do is to look at their colonies. You learn far more by getting your head stuck in a colony of bees than you do by watching a video. So what I want people to do is to try and learn through observation, your own observation, and then sort of interpret what the bees are trying to tell them. I'm going to give a small selection of topics in this presentation, not all of them, just a little bit of a flavour of some of the things that I'm trying to deal with. We as beekeepers, I think, need to understand that what works in one colony, in one place, in 1 year, may not work the next. It might not even work in the same apiary, because things do vary quite a bit. As a beekeeper, I think you need to know the basics, and certainly in my teaching at Whisper Green, my local association, we try and get the basics into early beekeepers as quickly as we can. The simple sort of things, like life cycles, what's happening in the colony when it's swarming, disease recognition, the simple sort of things, because once you get up to a reasonable level like that, then you can work out, you've got the knowledge to work out if what you've been told or what you've read is actually reliable, or you think, I'll give that one a miss, or perhaps I'll try it on a small number of colonies. Please don't believe me. Just because I've been keeping bees for 60 years, or nearly 60 years, doesn't mean to say I know it all. And neither does anybody else who's been keeping bees 60 years either. Please don't believe me. You make your own mind up based on your own knowledge and your own experience, and indeed your own skill as well. So try it or look for yourself. You can do it very often, as I will explain here, by a few experiments. Now, I know we've got 1 or 2 scientists here who will have a bit of a laugh and a joke about some of the ways I set things up, but it doesn't matter. Providing you can satisfy yourself, then that's fine. As I say, I'm not a scientist, but what I try and do is get a reasonable sample size. Now, with a small-scale beekeeper, that might not be easy. If you've only got 2 colonies, don't abandon it, just do something and see what happens. Very often you need some sort of control, and you also need discipline as well, because if you worked out what you're going to do, if you've worked out that you should do something on Thursday morning, then Friday morning may not be good enough, or may get a different result, or it's slewed in one way or another. So you need a little bit of discipline. I guess there'll be one or two people who might have a bit of a crack about that, or might even be able to add things, I hope. But if they challenge what I tell them, fine, I'm okay with that. Very often you get different results. And I've spoken to scientists over the years, and sometimes they can't even get their own results to replicate, let alone what you can do. In beekeeping, we are dealing with biology, and we need to understand that. Now, biology itself is very, very variable. A simple thing is, most people know that the queen will emerge after 15 or 16 days after the egg is laid. Because I've raised a lot of queens artificially, I can tell you, I know how old the larva is. I can tell you that very, very often they can be anything up to 4 days overdue for emerging, quite common. I get several a year, so it is quite common. So that's how variable biology can be. Also, if you get two colonies side by side in the same time, they both appear to be in the same condition. Very often you can do the same thing to both of them. You go back 7, 10, 14 days later, and they have behaved differently. They've responded differently. Some of this information, of course, has got into the mainstream thinking and teaching. It is just pushed out by teachers, perhaps the less experienced ones, because they're probably just reading from a script almost. I'm now going to show you a few examples. Now, some of you are going to say, "I've never heard that," but all of those that I show you, I've heard in talks, magazines, videos, teaching material, local beekeeping associations, most recently webinars, all those sort of things. All of these I've seen not just once, but on several occasions. The first one I'm going to put up is that when you... You got it. Either you've had the experience or you've read the book. What book, he says. If you leave 2 queen cells, why? Well, it's insurance in case one is dead, which actually sounds pretty logical, doesn't it? Until you do it and somebody else ends up with a chimney full of bees that's yours. So what I've found is what often happens if the colony's in the right condition and the weather's fine and that sort of thing, the bees will usually swarm on the first one or ones to emerge, so they're going to swarm anyway. The other thing is, which doesn't very often get mentioned, is that it takes several days, probably somewhere between 5, 6, might even be 7, for the bees to detect that a queen cell is dead. And then they start chewing it down. So, of course, what happens is, out goes the swarm with the first one to emerge, leaving a dub one behind, which is what we're supposed not to be doing anyway. So, of course, then somebody else becomes a beekeeper, whether they want to or not. Probably won't bother to join the local beekeeping association. And, of course, they could be yours. So I'm asking you folk and anybody else that if you leave 2 queen cells, make sure you go on the swarm collection list, and if somebody within 2 miles of you has bees in their chimneys, you go and get them out. We're told that queen cells should be dimpled. So would you use that queen cell or not? That was overdue. I'd left it several days, cut it open, there it was dead. So there's a fairly good-looking queen cell I think a lot of people would use, dead. The dimples on a queen cell, we're always told those without dimples, they're no good, they're dead. Is that correct or is that not correct? Sorry, reliable. Reliable. Well, again, observation, and what you'll find is that bees tend to work the queen cells quite how they do it. I've never seen them do it, and I don't know what they're doing. I'm wondering if there's some sort of pheromone involved in it or not, I don't know. But what happens is that they actually work the outside, perhaps building up more wax on there, and really what's happening is the one on the right is probably 3 or 4 days younger than the one on the left. So that's my observation anyway. But here are some that aren't sealed, and they're undimpled. The dimpling comes as the older they get. We're told more and more that bees will only swarm on swarm cells. I don't know what's pushing this at the moment. I've always heard it, but it seems to be more and more at the moment, so it must be appearing somewhere. We're told that they will not swarm on supersedure or emergency cells. Well, that's not my experience, because I reckon they will. Again, if they're in the right condition, then out they can go, irrespective of the queen cells. Try it, folks. Just leave them and see what happens. Because I reckon bees will swarm on all sorts of queen cells. If the colony's in the right condition, that is, it's big enough, and the weather and conditions are favourable. Obviously, if they're not, it's hammering down with rain for 3 or 4 days, then they'll do exactly the same as they will anyway. They will destroy the queen cells. We're told that we can identify queen cells by where they are on the frame. That is, and this varies a little bit depending on who tells you. Swarm cells always on the bottom of the frame, and then some people say they're up the sides as well. Supersedure cells on the face of the comb. Well, they often are, but again, that's pretty unreliable. Try it, have a look. They can be anywhere. Here are some queen cells. There's 5 of them there, so they must be swarm cells, not supersedure cells. There's too many. Where are they? On the face of the comb. There's some more on the face of the comb. Okay, it's a pretty green comb, but it wasn't one of mine. Was it? Was it one? Wasn't one of yours, Grace, was it? No, but you get combs like this, and bees will build anywhere. Also, they've got the cell cups there ready for the next round as well, or the ones they didn't use, and they can only use those for supersedure and swarm cells. Here are supersedure cells. I happen to know there are only 2 of them. If there's 2 supersedure, or if 2 queen cells, very close together, same age, then they're going to be supersedure, not swarm. Where are they? On the bottom of the frame. This one here is on the edge, right next to the sidebar. It was the only one, so it had to be supersedure. And what happened? The colony actually swarmed, leaving that behind. Yes, they did swarm out with a clipped queen, and they went back, but that's what I found. So all I did was took the queen away and just let that carry on. Yeah, going back to that a little bit, on several occasions I've been at a demonstration and I've asked people what sort of queen cells that are on the comb, and I've even had people say, oh, the ones around the edge must be swarm cells and the one on the face must be supersedure. Well, if you think about it, you shouldn't be able, or you shouldn't have both of them in the same colony at the same time. We're also told to leave queen cells unsealed, and I expect you've heard this too. Why not? Well, in case one or more of them are dud. That sounds quite logical, but what about the unsealed ones? When they're sealed, why can't they be done in a few days' time? Doesn't quite tie up to me, but there are good reasons for leaving unsealed queen cells. One of which is they may have already emerged, and very often what happens is a worker bee goes inside to clean out the residual royal jelly, and bees have actually got quite a sense of humour, because the others just reshut the lid and just briefly seal the tip back, so it looks very much like a sealed queen cell. So, of course, the way around that is just to touch the tips, because they will break away quite easily. The other one is you've got at least 7 days before it emerges. So if you're perhaps a weekend beekeeper and you leave an unsealed queen cell one Saturday, by the next Saturday it shouldn't have emerged, so you shouldn't have a swarm come out. So there is a good reason for leaving unsealed queen cells, but not the ones that we're normally given. In wild comb, that is free-living colonies, the points of cells are always at the top. Well, are they? I've removed several hundred what we term free-living colonies from trees, buildings, and that sort of thing, and I take a lot of notice of what I see. I do all sorts of things, like I measure between the distance between the combs. I have a look at the combs. I take a lot of photographs. Here's one that was in a building. And I'm just going to concentrate on that area there, blow it up, and if you look at it closely, you'll see that the orientation of the cells is all over the place. So, no, they're not always at the top. Propolis. We've been told for years and years and years that we shouldn't be raising queens from heavy propolisers because all people make all sorts of excuses. I play the piano and all sorts of stuff like that. So if they're heavy propolisers, don't raise queens from them, and it is still being pushed. Coupled with that, we're also told that bees don't propolise smooth surfaces. So I'm putting those two together with under the sort of heading of propolis. But again, I've removed a lot of free-living colonies, and inside the nest cavity, the bees put propolis over everything, everywhere. Also, when I started keeping bees in the early 1960s, very, very few people spring cleaned. Very, very few. They just carried on year after year after year. And in them days, you'd easily get a colony that lasts 10, 15 or even 20 years, the same colony. And I know many beekeepers who just had one colony. They just get going and going and going. They didn't die out. So, of course, there's a massive build-up of propolis. I actually learnt quite a lot from those two situations. Before the recent work has been done, I just had it in the back of my mind that propolis was good for bees. Otherwise, I don't think I'd bother to do it. There's now been a lot of work done, and because propolis is anti-everything, antibacterial, antifungal, antiviral, all the rest of it, the bees are put in a shield, or some people call it an envelope, around their nest, which is effectively self-medication. And it has been proven that that these colonies are healthier than those without. I do ask the question, we're all taught to flame our boxes out, aren't we? Are we not destroying what the bees are trying to do themselves? Seriously, I have never flamed, and I don't think I've ever had a problem, and I just question the value of it. I'm not saying don't do it. You can do it if you like, provided it's not a polystyrene hive, of course. Here's a colony in a wooden building that I removed a couple of years ago, I suppose. You can see the woodwork round. If you look on the left-hand side, you'll see that the front was covered with matchboarding. Inside, it was actually clad by plywood. So let me just show you the matchboarding at the front. There's where it's obviously blocked off, and look, the bees have fairly heavily propolised what was underneath. Now that is prepared matchboarding, so you've got plain boards which are smooth. Is that just one-off case? So this business of bees don't propolise smooth surfaces. Is it somebody who said it and it just gets copied? I don't know. I'm certainly not going to try and discredit anyone, but there's my evidence. Here's the plywood cladding on the inside. Look what the bees have done to that. And you can see where I've cut down with a knife to cut the comb out. So you're back to the light-coloured plywood. is a Module 6 question, and I'll state now I'm not getting at Module 6 or the exam system or anything of that nature, but I did spot a question on one of the papers. Approximately how long after a queen loss are queen cells likely to be started? Quite a reasonable question. How many of you actually know? So you'd have failed that exam then. Also, allied to that topic is it's often assumed that emergency cells are started together. So the queen's taken away, and all of a sudden the bees think, oh, we've got to get 15 emergency cells, and you get 15 different little work parties, all producing cells. That's what's very often thought, and I'm not going to ask you what you think or thought at all, but you know I've got something up my sleeve, don't you? My observations have always been that it's been very, very variable, but I hadn't got any proof, so I tried to find some. So you guessed it, I did an experiment which tries to cover both of those points. The results of which I wrote for an article for BBK News, which is a sort of occasional page I do called Patterson page, 349 October 2019, and here's what it was all about. On the 22nd of May 2019, I had 4 colonies, well, I had more than 4 colonies, but I dequeened 4 colonies at the bottom of my garden. Right, there's the 4 colonies, which for your purposes I'll call A, B, C and D. Along the top are the dates, 23rd, 24th, and brackets underneath are the number of days from the time taking the queen away. Now, when I say day, what I really did was I inspected them within shouting distance of 24 hours later. So I didn't do evening one day, morning next day. It was within within an hour or two or 24 hours. Okay. In the columns, there's numbers. That is the number of queen cells either sealed or just started on that particular day in that particular colony. Colony A was actually a swarm that had come into a bait hive on the 12th of April, which is 6 weeks earlier. So if you follow along the line for A is low numbers, and that may be just because that colony was a swarm. I don't know. That might need some work doing on it. Colonies B, C, and D were very similar. They were full honey producing colonies. They all had 2 or 3 supers on. I'm in a North Sea rape area, so they were working that. All of them overwintered previous year's queens. So previous year's queens, which I haven't put down there, only because I didn't put it in the original article and I should have done. The following day, so 24 hours later, there was only 1 colony that started queen cells, and that one had produced 14. Now what I did was I shook the bees off the combs so I could actually count them. I realised now that a scientist will say, well, I should have taken photographs of wherever they are or whatever. I didn't do that. 2 days later, colony A still hadn't produced an emergency cell. Still hadn't produced. Again, that might have been the fact it was a swarm 6 weeks earlier. I don't know. Colony A, after 4 days, it had only put up 3 queen cells. All of a sudden, it decided it was going to put up another 2. So that's within 5 days. They're still putting up queen cells. And colony D had done a similar sort of thing after 5 days. Now we start getting the more interesting bit, because here, colony B, after 4 days, they'd had 3 queen cells aborted, and when I say aborted, they'd started chewing them down, but 3 more to replace them on that inspection. So even though they had 30 emergency cells, they still decided they wanted more. The following day, they put up another 4. Well, in human terms, and this is one of the reasons that we shouldn't be humanising bees, why didn't they put those 4 up on the previous day as well? Doesn't make sense to me, but it might to you, and then you can use up a couple of hours of question time. The same colony, at that point, after 5 days, one queen cell had been aborted, and they still produced another one. Still produced it. Colony C, after 5 days, one queen cell had been aborted with none to replace it, so they were down to 1. But if you look at the following day, they've built another 4. This is just a simple experiment by a simple person in a simple situation of getting these sort of results. And then colony D, after 5 or 6 days, they'd lost a couple of queen cells, but they hadn't built any more. So what answer was accepted in module 6? Well, I don't know, because I did ask them and they wouldn't tell me. Some points from that was a small sample, but quite a large variation. Whether that will be multiplied up at that stage or not, I don't know. Certainly a larger sample may give a wider variation. I don't know, haven't got a clue, but you folk might be able to. And then one of you can stand up here next year and tell us what you had. After 24 hours, only one colony has started emergency queen cells, and a fairly large number, 14 of them. Totally, there were 65 queen cells started, 7 of them were aborted. That's about 10%, all before sealing, incidentally, every one of them. Now, that may have been because I shook the bees off the frames. I don't know. That will need checking, obviously. But the great thing about it is, it dispels one of the myths, is every colony, the starting of the cells was staggered. So from that small sample, or that small experiment rather, it tends to show that they don't start them all at the same time. Interestingly, we're told that bees start on larvae that are too old. That's never been my experience, and it certainly wasn't in that little experiment. Yet they all had small larvae. So the bees, if they're choosing, seem to choose larvae of the right age. Even the later ones, after 5 or 6 days, even the later ones had small larvae. I've got a theory on that, but let's not worry too much about that at the moment. Now, that is a sort of experiment that's simple, that anyone in here who's got bees can do, I think. Whether you'll be taken seriously by anyone, I don't know. I probably won't be, but I really don't mind about that, because I did this really for my own benefit and my own satisfaction. Going on to a terminology, we hear these days about under-supering and over-supering. What does it mean? Well, it actually means traditionally, if the hive needs another super, if you put it under the existing ones, that's under-supering. If you put it over the existing ones, that is over-supering. But these days, I'm afraid, probably as much to do with inexperience as anything, some people have decided that it's wintering, where you put an empty super under a brood chamber or over the top, and that's under-supering and over-supering. I have also heard that under-supering means where you're not giving enough supers, and over-supering means where you're giving too much. So, you make your own mind up who's right and who's wrong, but if you come and have a word with me afterwards, I'll tell you. We keep hearing that fertile queens and drones don't feed themselves. Bit of evidence there, folks. On the left, that's not actually my queen, because I usually mark mine pink, as some of you know. But there's a queen clearly feeding on nectar, fertile queen, and there's a drone doing the same on the right-hand side. And strangely enough, this summer, when I was doing a demonstration at Whisper Green, there were 3 drones on the same frame feeding themselves. You know, if you keep your eyes open, it's surprising what you can see. Brood pattern. Yeah, we must have these great big slabs of brood, mustn't we? But I can tell you that there have been many good queens culled simply because of misinterpretation of what's on the comb. I accept that a queen A comb can show if you've got a good queen or perhaps a failing queen, but you need to look at the comb quite closely. We're often told that what's called shotgun brood, pepper pot brood, call it what you like, is caused by inbreeding. Quite frankly, I don't think that's an issue. It might on a small island, but personally, I don't think inbreed's an issue. It might be if you buy queens from a supplier where they're producing thousands of queens from a small number of breeder queens. That might be the issue, but certainly not for most of us people, I think. Disease, yes, of course, but then you've got the signs elsewhere, chalk brood, sack brood, or whatever. If the bees are good at detecting and removing varroa, if we get rid of those queens because they appear to be giving shotgun brood, we could be getting rid of a really good characteristic. But I don't know, I'm only an ordinary beekeeper, and there's only me it takes any notice of me. Of course, the cells could be full of pollen and nectar when the queen was on that side of the comb. And this is what happens very, very often if you get a nectar flow, because, of course, the bees bring in the food and they put it in the brood nest first, and then they move it up overnight as something else you can observe. But, of course, what happens then is you get a knock-on effect from the rest of the summer. So you'll never ever get or not for that summer, you'll never get good brood pattern. But it's not a natural situation anyway, because in a tree, what happens is if the colony's expanding, the queen lays underneath the existing brood all the time, where there's empty cells, and then of course the emerging brood at the top. That's where they pack the food, of course, for they want winter stores. So it forces the brood nest down, and the queen is laying on new comb all the time. And of course, in a managed colony, she's imprisoned with a floor at the bottom and either a crown board or a queen excluder above. So she has got to reuse the cells. So it's a case of reading the comb. See what's there. If the cells are full within the brood nest, the queen can't lay in it. So, a couple of weeks later, it'll look as if there's a shotgun brood or whatever. There's virgin comb. I think you can look at those cells and you'll find an egg in virtually every one of them. That's absolutely fine. But if that was an older comb in a colony, you'd have lots of things in some of those cells, so the queen couldn't do it. So that should be the result. That is one of my combs, by the way. Before you folk knew that I had something up my sleeve, based on what you've probably been told, would you requeen that colony? No? No, of course you wouldn't, because you know it's coming, don't you? But I can tell you, a lot of people would replace that queen. And I've been at demonstrations and people have actually been quite vociferous about something like this. So what we do is we'll just have a look at that little area there, look. So we blow that up, and if you look, probably a couple, might even be 3 inches away, you've got brood that's 12 days apart, which we're probably told we shouldn't have. One of the reasons for that is that, of course, you've got 3 cells there with nectar in. Yes, there are going to be others as well. And you get all those cells with pollen in. This is basically what the bees are doing naturally, because as the remaining brood will emerge, the bees will fill it with more food, and the queen will lay underneath the existing brood. Now, even if you change the queen in that colony, you won't get a good pattern for the rest of the season because, of course, of the knock-on effect. So this business about you must have these wonderful slabs of brood, I'm very, very dubious about. That happened to be the next frame, and the reason was I just expanded the colony and I put an empty comb next to it. So there's 2 combs side by side with what appears to be different results. So all I'm saying is, don't just do as you're told. Try and work it out. And there's the comb again, and it was a bit of an apology. Sorry, Queen, it wasn't your fault, but the book said you had to go. So please, folks, just read the colony, read the comb before taking what might be drastic action. You could be getting rid of an absolute gem of a queen. You really could. Oh. How often do you hear that people call a division board a dummy board? A dummy board is on the left, which is a dummy frame. A division board is on the right-hand side, which if you look in American literature is called a follower. So that's the difference between them. Even going back to at least 1944, William Herod Hempsall in his book, The Beekeeper's Guide, wrote, "The division board is frequently miscalled a dummy." Cleaning kit. You're laughing, but the number of times I've seen people been advised to wash with caustic soda. I've seen it in newsletters, online, forums, all sorts of things like that. If you do see it, folks, please, somebody's going to end up with a bit less skin than they had half a minute ago. Please try and help put this sort of stuff right. Don't say, "Oh, I can't be bothered with that," because somebody could get burnt very nastily. You should never use castellations in brood boxes, and I bet you've all heard that, haven't you? Bet you've all heard it. Yeah, but you know my answer, don't you? Why not, I say. I've been using them for well over 50 years, and I know many others do, and I'm certainly one other person in this room that I know uses them. The reason why not? Well, of course, you roll bees, don't you? When you take the frames out, you roll bees. That's the people who don't actually know how to take the frames out in the first place. Because I don't roll bees, I just use a very simple technique. You take a frame out, just lift it out of the castellations, move it one way or the other towards you or away from you until you just feel resistance. You won't squash any bees. Honest, don't think I've ever squashed any bees in my life. And just gently rest it on a spacer. So you've immediately gained 5 millimetres or perhaps a bit more. Do the same with the next frame, and then usually you can take the frame after that out. So here we are. Look, no gloves, smoker between the knees. It's got to be me. Yeah, lift the first one out, second one out, and then you can get the next one out quite easily, and it just creates a space look. And you know why people are denied the sheer pleasure of using castellated spacers in the brood box, I've absolutely no idea. If you've got short lugs, then I wouldn't use them. We need imported queens to increase genetic diversity. Keep hearing this. Well, there's around about 250,000 managed colonies in England and Wales, plus the free living colonies, which my estimate is of probably 50,000, because I reckon for every 5 colonies I know, managed colonies, I know of one free living colony. I don't know, is that about what you find, Grace? You don't know? You never counted them? Okay, that's my guess. So we're looking at 300,000-ish colonies of bees. It won't help genetic diversity just to bring in a few extras, which could be produced by commercial queen breeders raising from a small number of breeder queens, which I suspect would make the situation worse. Free living colonies are a reservoir for disease. Get rid of them. Blast them out of existence. Well, as I say, I've removed several hundred, and this is my experience. In general, they're very healthy and very much healthier than many of the managed colonies. I've never seen foul brood in a managed colony at all. And if I've seen chalk brood or sack brood, it's at very, very, very light levels. don't see the heavy chalk brood that I do see in managed colonies. I don't know the reason for that. My guess is that if they got one weakness, they probably got others, and literally they're taken out by nature, because natural selection is a pretty powerful tool for bees. And going on from that very slightly, I think I'm going to touch on it in a lecture on Saturday. The bees I see in managed colonies, some of them I'd never ever seen in the wild of that type, but that's a different topic. Jumbo hives. These days, a lot of people think they're 14 by 12s. Oh no, they're not, because in the Gleanings in Bee Culture, which is a magazine which was produced by the Root Appliance Manufacturing Company, the 1st of May edition, 1899, there was a letter from a man called A.N. Draper, who was apparently a commercial beekeeper. He sent a letter to the editor suggesting that that Root made hives that were that took Langstroth frames, but they were Dadant depth. Now the width and the top bars and the width of them, Langstroth and Dadant are the same. So all he was suggesting is, and made Langstroth frames 2 1/8 inches deeper. You might ask, well, why not just use Dadant frames? The reason is that Langstroth spacing is 3 millimetres smaller than Dadant. Anyway, there's a longer story to that, but that's where it started. The first reference I can find to them to the name jumbo is in the 1920 edition of the Dadant System of Beekeeping, where the jumbo hive, which is exactly the same thing, was mentioned. I suspect, but I don't know, but Dadants, of course, were competitors of Root, and they just did it really for comparison. So if any of you new beekeepers have bought a 14 by 12, being told that it's a jumbo, you then go and buy some frames and foundation, and you end up with the Langstroth jumbo. Don't swear at the suppliers, because they'll be supplying you with the real thing. Nosema sample size. How many? 30 bees. Right. If I asked you the reason why, you'd probably give me the usual reason, which you've all heard. The 30 bee sample is based on statistical probability of a 90% chance of seeing a 10% infection rate, or a 95% chance of seeing a 15% infection rate. Correct? You've all heard that, have you? Anybody know the real reason? You couldn't have read Dave Cushman's website, because it's on there. So I'm going to give it to you. In personal correspondence, that is an email from a beekeeper who had a long connection with Rothamsted, where Dr. Bailey worked on bee diseases, wrote this to me. The 30 bee sample was standardised in Rothamsted many years ago because the centrifuge tubes that they were using for various purposes and had lying about the lab just happened to contain 30 bees. Much later, Dr. Bailey consulted statisticians, and they concluded that to improve the chances of detecting infections, the sample size would have to be increased 10 or 100-fold, and this wasn't practical. A matchbox also happens to helpfully contain 30 bees. So, if you can now quote that, because I have, if you want to believe what you're told. How often have you heard that queen cells don't get chalk brood? There's a little bit of evidence, because there's the chalk brood mummy that came out of that queen cell. Eating bananas before handling bees. What does it do to you? What does it do to the bees? It makes them angry, doesn't it? You all heard that? Who has heard that eating bananas? Yeah, look, see. Have you ever tried it? I have. Give it a go. I have. No problem. But I've done another experiment. I peeled a banana, put it on top of what I think could be considered a strong colony, together with the skin, took a photograph after 15 minutes. There it is. What I should have done, and what Grace would tell me I should have done, is mash a banana up. But there it is. Anyway, challenge what you're told. I've had a couple of comments on the book, and I was challenged myself. I don't mind at all. Haven't got a problem. That's great. That's great. Haven't got a problem. The more we challenge, I think, the more we learn. The more we challenge, the more we like to do our little experiments, and sometimes you may get a different answer than you think you're going to get, and you may well get the answer to something else too. So, that's it, folks. Thanks very much, and beekeeping is still fun.
Could you talk a little bit about the age of the queen and any mythbusters you might have around that?
I'm not going to answer the question because you might challenge me. Age of queens. Yeah, this is becoming a massive, massive problem in my view. Up until about 20 years ago, I had queens that would live 4, 5, sometimes 6 years. I doubt now if I've got a queen older than 2 years old. There seems to be 3 things that are the problem, and I've got a page on Dave Cushman's website so you can read it. Young queens being superseded like very soon after they started laying. Sometimes even before the first brood is sealed, they put up supersedure cells. Never used to do that. Young queens failing and queens simply disappearing. Yeah, you've had them. Well, the really clever people are telling me this isn't happening, but there's so many people say yes, they are having. What it is, I don't know. My guess is there's something going wrong with the pheromones, because everything is sort of pheromone related. That might be a bit of a red herring, I don't know. But I don't think I've got a queen older than 2 years old now. But I used to have them 4, 5, sometimes 6 years old, if indeed that answers the question.
You're collecting wild colonies. How are you housing them when you actually get them? And do you see any difference in their behaviour once you've had them in a hive for a few years?
Well, that is a lecture in its own, and I have got it on one of the other National Honey Show ones. Let's take the behaviour first. Behaviour-wise, I've removed several hundred. They're usually good-tempered. I do not come across bad-tempered ones. If they've been in there any length of time, that is over a winter. If they've only just gone in there, yes, you can get some pretty narky ones, and they are quite unpleasant to deal with. Because the problem is when you've got a colony go into a new cavity, you've got soft comb, so you can't hold it easily. With older comb, it's much tougher, and of course the comb's falling about all over the place. That's that. The other thing is, which other people agree with me, if a colony's been in a wild, free-living place, then rather, for over a winter, I just do not come across yellow queens, and I'll never see yellow drones in the colony. Yes, I do if they've only just gone in there, but the winter seems to take them out. They're always healthy. They've got to be. They must be survivors. They're all strong colonies too. Whereas, of course, in managed colonies, you get weak ones, and they're weak because of the beekeepers have, they've overstretched them or whatever. You saw that one in the building. That is typical of what I see. If they're collapsing, you've got a different situation. Now, I may be wrong, but in a natural nest like that, a wild living, a free living colony like that, the nutrition is absolutely spot on. When people fiddle around, they overstretch, they take brood away, all sorts of things like that. My concern is they get the balance of nurse bees wrong, And you may well end up with a nutrition problem, which then has a knock-on effect, which could aggravate, I don't know, chalk brood, sack brood, all those sort of things. I don't know, but I'm only guessing. In the old days, we used to have county beekeeping instructors, and they were all very, very good beekeepers, and they would help answer questions like that, because they were a sort of halfway point between the beekeeper and the scientist. Now we haven't got that sort of situation. The scientists have got to deal with ordinary beekeepers. But if I come across a wild or free living colony, I very rarely requeen it. Usually they're very good bees. They're tough. They're going to survive. They are productive too. I've taken some tremendous yields out of a building.
So if you've had a colony that's like been in the building for like 10 or 15 years or something, and it comes out, it's obviously got varroa resistance and the like. Do you actually see any change in their varroa resistance once they're in a managed situation?
You need to be careful that it's actually been the same colony, been in there any length of time. Now, when I was young, I come from a rural area, and if Bert or Alice, who were 80 years old and lived in the same house all their life, if they say there's been a colony up in that tree for 25 years, that colony's been up there for 25 years. These days, I'm sorry, but what you're told is unreliable. I'm stopping there because I don't think you can say, if you've got proof that it's been there that length of time, get in touch with these people. Sorry to point Grace, but you know, somebody like Grace or Steve Martin or whatever, Steve Martin, tell them, because they would be interested if they've genuinely been there. But we don't want to send them on wild goose chases because their time's pretty valuable. But if you've got good proof that they've been there any length of time. Do you want to say anything?
The information coming in from what we call custodians, people monitoring colonies, varies in reliability. Some people, I would say, are very reliable. They're beekeepers. The bees are in their roof spaces. They're seeing them every day. They're actually catching swarms from them. And then other people are members of the public. Some of them are more reliable than others. But no matter how reliable the monitoring is, there'll always be scepticism as to whether somebody missed something. So therefore we are now developing methods to prove that using genetics. But we are seeing the same colony lineage for multiple years, for 4 or 5, beyond the time at which you would expect death from varroa. We're definitely seeing that, improving that. Yeah. But if you take colonies from anywhere, so if you move a managed colony from one end of the country to another, you get changes in behaviour. Queens can abscond, the bees can come down with disease. So I would say it's something similar. If you were to take out a colony, the stress in taking out that colony from where it was and putting it in a box could be enough to really damage those bees. So it depends on the skill. I haven't done an awful lot of them. I'm not very skilled at it. So it depends on the skill of the person taking them out and how calm and slow they are and how far they move them, because I do think more and more evidence is coming out about the importance of local bees. So if he takes them out from somewhere up the country and brings them down home, well, that move alone might impact the bees. So I do think, you know, there's an animal welfare perspective. No more than us, bees are extremely sensitive, and stress can have an awful lot of damage on bees. So I would say it depends. It's all very variable.
Yeah, it is.
Right, go ahead.
Yeah. Several years ago, I was told by somebody that, bees have been in there 10, 15 years or whatever. So I went and took them out. There's a Mark Queen there.
I have one that I took from a wild colony 2018. She told me it was swarming. I went out and got swarms from that and put them in a box, and it's my strongest colony. It's really, really good, and I'm splitting it and circulating it now to beekeepers and stuff, because it's productive, it's disease free, it has varroa, but it tolerates varroa rather than being resistant. It tolerates varroa, so they do exist.
It occurs to me we still don't know an awful lot about these Blenheim bees, the stocks that seem to have formed an isolated community. surely there's something to be learned from the fact that they seem to have multiple queens in each stock, and that would probably mean that you'd have long-lived communities in one recess or colony home.
Yeah, I won't comment about the blending bees because I don't actually know very much about them, only what's in print, and it's easy to challenge what you're told, isn't it? I'd like to see more observation of those. It's not easy to observe a colony that's in a tree. I'd like to get some cameras in there and have a look. So I suspect there's something going on, but I don't know what. I don't know really anything. It's about 500 acres, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean.
Oh, this is my lecture, not yours.
I know. Well, you can join in.
Right, yeah,
you can join in mine tomorrow. So there you go. You have more to say about mine.
That's a challenge.
Philippe, I am collaborating with those in Blenheim, so I have they did send me samples last year, but they got cotton customs and the DNA is not wonderful, but he's doing really a lot of work in observing the bees and figuring out what's going on and comparing the work to Tom Seeley's work, and also trying to put bait hives around the edges of the forest to stop influx from nearby beekeepers. What we've looked at, a lot of them are hybridized. They're not black bees, but what's happening with those, and again we're doing some work in the Boughton estate further north, the bees are getting darker and they are becoming adapted, so that he is actually describing quite a lot of interesting stuff. We need to document it, so I would say watch this space. It's a really some of the oldest oak forests in Europe, with a surviving population of bees, and I would say that could be very valuable to beekeepers in the UK. So we don't know a lot about it yet. We've only started to look at the bees and get samples out. Philippe is doing it on top of, with no resources, no money, on top of a day job, climbing ultra high trees with climbing equipment, and trying to do it for the betterment of the bees. So I would say watch the space. There will be dead cool stuff coming out of Boughton and Blenheim in the next 3-4 years. For sure. We're doing some genomics and lots of different stuff, and we're trying to collate the data.
I think it's unfortunate that he's been subject to quite a lot of online ridicule, and it could well be he's got a resource there that we could learn an awful lot from.
On the subject of the feral colonies, I can take you to 2 colonies that I know personally have been in existence for at least 10 years, one in a roof and the other one in shiplap timber. But the question I've got for Roger is, a lot of us are told that angry bees or aggressive bees produce more honey than docile bees. Could I have your comment on that, please, Roger?
Aggressive colonies, well, it is in the book. That took you some time, didn't it? Quite honestly, I don't believe it, because I've come across some fairly gentle bees that produce good crops. I've got gentle bees, and I've just had the best year I've had in nearly 60 years. My area is just middling for honey production, but at the bottom of my garden, 13 colonies, honey-producing colonies. Okay, some of them were messed around a bit with queen rearing and all sorts of things like that. I had 4 that produced 200 pound of honey. These are just ordinary, local, gentle bees, and anyone who's seen any of my Live at the Hive videos will know how gentle bees are. Incidentally, on single brood chambers as well. I really don't believe it. Now, I don't mean these soft, soppy yellow things that just sit at home waiting to be fed. I don't mean them. But, you know, if you've got a colony that you can handle well with occasional smoke, they can still be pretty productive.
When you were talking about the queen problems, have you noticed the correlation between the problems that you've had and how hybridized the bees are? I only ask because in North Wales, where it's relatively quite a lot of Apis mellifera and quite dark bees, I was talking to someone a few weeks ago that they've got a queen that is 5 or 6 years old.
If somebody tells you they've got a queen 5 or 6 years old, these days I would challenge them. 20, 25, 30 years ago I wouldn't. It depends who it is, of course. My bees in West Sussex are fairly hybridised. In fact, they're quite, they're mongralised, let's say. Hybridised, I think is the wrong term, mongralised. But I usually get in trouble for that. But I have been other places that, in fact, your apiary, you had a problem. I remember a queen with deformed wings. So I do see them everywhere, and all sorts too.
I was in Crete talking to a beekeeper, and I don't know if you know the famous pendant of two queen bees, golden pendant. It's almost 4,000 years old. Was found in a Minoan palace.
Yeah.
And it's two queen bees that sort of seem to be touching head and tail, if you like, and then there's 3 drops of nectar and so on. And this beekeeper said to me, what do you think these queen bees are doing? I said, well, normally they'd be stinging each other if they were, together. No, he says, no, they're cooperating. And I don't know if this is a myth, so this is why I'm mentioning it. It's the first time I've ever heard it. But he reckons, and I think some of the beekeepers there practice this, they have a queen excluder separating 2 queens in brood boxes,
two queen
and the bees go freely between the 2, and they're apparently a lot more productive.
Yeah, this is quite common.
So it's true, right? Okay, I've never heard it before. You can expand it more.
But don't forget those queens are separated. I think usually if you get 2 queens in a colony, they're mother and daughter. Yeah. Usually.
Well, this is what I suggested. I said, yes, I've heard of 2 queens, mother and daughter. And he said, no, they don't have to be. But that's, Yeah. You can...
there's a method that the raw jelly producers use, which a man called John Harding developed into a 2-queen queen rearing system. We've basically got 2 towers, and it provides bees for 1 colony in the middle to raise the queen cells. So that's effectively a two queen system. I think in France they do a lot of 2-queen beekeeping. In fact, there's books written on it, but I believe they keep the queens apart.
Yeah. And is there evidence that they're more productive? Because that's what he was saying. This pendant was telling the story that in that situation there's more honey produced.
Yeah, I think the issue is, so it's if you want to do any manipulation, it's much more difficult because you've got more boxes and all sorts of things like that. Yeah.
What's the basis for your assumption that queens can't live longer anymore? Why do you assume that if somebody says their queen lives for 5 years, that you would challenge them?
Let's just look at what the sort of things that are happening. I've seen queens that have produced, to my eye, really good brood, yet there's supersedure cells put up very soon after the queen has started to lay. And then the disappearing one, and my guess is, but I don't know, supersedure tends to suggest that the pheromone isn't getting through to the bees in some way. Now, I'm wondering if the various chemicals, bearing in mind that pheromone is a chemical, I'm wondering if the chemicals that the beekeepers are putting in the hive or what's coming in from outside is some way modifying the pheromone so it's giving a different message to the bees. I'm not a scientist, I'm not a chemist, I'm just an ordinary beekeeper who spent all my working life engineering. The other one is the queens disappearing, because sometimes the colony puts up emergency cells, sometimes they don't, and my experience is about a 50-50 mix. Now, it tends to suggest to me whether the emergency cells aren't put up, that the queen goes off lay and it is instant, for whatever reason I don't know. Now, that might be that she's not being fed enough, right? And I think queens are because they're giving a pheromone off and saying, hey, I want feeding. If she's not fed, she stops laying. But she's still producing a little bit of pheromone until it gets to the point where the bees don't feed her anymore. And I'm wondering, I don't know, my guess is that she's starving. But I don't know. I've seen an awful lot of these. I've never seen a dead queen on a floor or anything of that nature. So what the bees are doing with them, I've no idea.